We're going to move on to our last item, which is an informational update on the Community Review Board on Police Practices. And our Executive Director, Charmaine Mosley, is here, and Doug Case. Good to see you, folks.
Yes.
And the floor is yours.
Hopefully we'll be able to get you out of here before lunch. Good morning, Chairman Kate, members of the committee, as well as staff. My name is Charmaine Mosley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Community Review Board on Police Practices, known as the CRB. I would like to thank Doug Case, who's the chair of the CRB, for joining me at the table this morning, as well as Sheila Haltrop for being here also this morning. We had a late night meeting last night, so I'm so happy that she's able to attend, and Chairman Case as well. So we're going to begin the presentation with, I'm going to just do a highlight of civilian oversight of law enforcement, as well as the background, and then I'll turn it over to Chairman Case, who will talk about the CRB's improvements, as well as the work plan for fiscal year 2018 and 2019. And then I'll briefly go over the case statistics. The case statistics will only cover from the beginning of this fiscal year up until April 10th, 2018. So, okay, great. So when did civilian oversight of law enforcement began? Approximately over 70 years ago. Very interesting. It first began in 1948. That's when the first official civilian review agency was established back in Washington, D.C. And then in 1995, the NACOL, which is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, was established. NACOL is very important in the civilian oversight of law enforcement because that's an umbrella group of organizations that's interested in civilian oversight of law enforcement. The CRB, as well as myself, has been active members of the of NACOL. I've been an active member for over 15 years now. In 2016, we've seen 144 civilian review boards identified nationwide, and that's significant. Especially when what's happening nationwide. And in 2018, we saw that number increase drastically up to over 200. There are three forms of civilian oversight. The investigative board, which is like what CLERP has, our county counterpart, the auditor's model, as well as the review board, which is what the city of San Diego has also. We've seen a lot of hybrids recently that's been developing. So that's very, very important to know. Next slide. San Diego's background, a lot of these police review boards, you know, become established because of a shooting. It's a compilation of recent events that lead to one that, you know, has the city decide, oh, you know, we want to put together this police review board. But San Diego is very fortunate because their review board was established back in 1988. There were two competing propositions offered to the citizens of San Diego. Proposition F, which proposed the investigative model that has subpoena power, and Proposition G, which proposed the review model, which is what we have right now. Proposition G won that the support of the public and was passed. So San Diego background continues in this slide. Ballot Measure G actually passed in 2016, November of 2016, and with that ballot measure, there was a dual responsibility for the mayor and the city council. Previously, it was only the mayor responsible for the board. Now it's going to be the mayor and the city council, and they also changed the name of the Citizens Review Board on Police Practices to now the Community Review Board on Police Practices. And also, there's another addition to that ballot measure. The CRB has always been reviewing officer-involved shootings and in-custody death cases, but with the ballot measure, that made it added to the charter so that it'll be up to the people to change that as we move forward. So that's very, very important. And also in 2016, the Citizens Advisory Board on Police Community Relations was resurrected. And so that's CAB, that's known as CAB. And that board makes recommendations regarding police community relations, crime prevention, and community-oriented policing. So what's the purpose of the CRB? The purpose of the CRB is to empower this independent citizen group, it's a volunteer group, to make sure that complaints that are investigated by Internal Affairs are investigated thoroughly, fairly, and completely. and I'll talk about this later when I go over the slides about the case statistics. A lot of time goes into that because the board operates in teams of 3, and they go back and forth with the sergeants and internal affairs. If there are questions, if they want to add any allegations, or if there's issues with the case review, if there's things that's missing, there's a lot of going back and forth because they want to make sure that the cases and the investigations are completely and fairly and thoroughly done by internal affairs. They are also, they can also recommend policies which promote fair and humane policing of the city. The recommendations that the board has actually recommended to PD, most of the time those recommendations have been adopted by PD, so that's very important. I've recently decided to put up a lot of those recommendations onto the CRB's website, beginning with 2015 up until now. So I will continue to do that as far as transparency goes for the community. What else? Let's see. Yeah, next slide. So the Police Review Board, the CRB only reviews Category 1 cases. Those Category 1 cases are the force, arrest, slur, discrimination, and criminal conduct cases. They can review Category 2 cases, which are the less serious cases, such as service, courtesy, procedure, conduct, and I don't think others should be there, but if it's tied to a Category 1 case. Now, they can also, like I mentioned before, review officer-involved shootings and in-custody death cases. They're also responsible for evaluating the administration of discipline that's handed down to the officers in those cases that are sustained by internal affairs. The CRB, and Doug will talk about this in a minute, the CRB has developed procedures to audit Category 2 complaints not associated with a Category 1 complaint, because those Category 2 complaints do not get filtered down to the CRB because those are investigated or looked at the command level, not by internal affairs. Next slide. So this is important to note that the CRB has complete and unfettered access to information. If there's information that's missing from that case file, the team is actually I want to say encouraged to reach out to myself or to the chair, and we have meetings with the captain as well as the lieutenants to find out, okay, what happened with that information, because we want to make sure at the review that the teams actually have access to the entire case file. Whatever the sergeant has, the team should have as well. It's a matter of, this is not an adversarial board like the investigative model can be. This is a cooperative, collaborative model with internal affairs. The CRB does not issue orders to SDPD, and SDPD does not ignore requests and recommendations for the CRB. It's a collaborative working model that we have here. And the CRB also is required to look at the cases fair and do an impartial case review, and that's very, very important also. They have to try, and we all have our biases, they have to try really hard to keep their opinions out of it and look at the facts of the case. They are not an advocate for the police or the complainant. They advocate for a fair and thorough process. And so what they're doing is they're looking at the policy and the procedure, just like internal affairs is looking at. They're not looking at anything else. Their opinions have to be, put to the side, and that's what makes the process, work. Next slide. So currently, the board membership, and this is going to change as we move forward with the implementation of Measure G. We have 23 members appointed by the mayor. That's going to be now appointed by the mayor and the council. Renewable 1-year terms, maximum 8 years. Those terms are going to be renewable to 1-year, 2-year terms. And we try to get a diverse cross-section of San Diegans. We have a recruitment committee. We also have an outreach committee. We've increased our outreach efforts out in the community. So we're trying our best to get a diverse cross-section of San Diegans. The executive director, myself, is appointed by the mayor. And the board operates in teams of 3 when they go into internal affairs. There's not one person that goes into internal affairs by themselves. It's teams of 3 to look at the case review, well, to review the case file. The chair and the first vice chair does not participate in review teams, but they can if there's a backlog of cases. I can, if I'm looking at the case log and I see that there's a backlog or if a team is falling behind in reviewing a case, I can assign those cases to the chair and the first vice chair, which is very important also. And prospective members, that's also something that's going to be changed also on the implementation of Measure G. The CRB has something called prospective members who undergo training, and they're able, once they complete all of the training, they're able to be assigned to cases to go ahead and review a case and to write a report. That's going to, I want to say that classification is going to be eliminated with the implementation of Measure G, as well as the alternate classification. So, yes. So I'm going to turn this over to Chair Case, who's going to talk about Measure G implementation as well as the process improvements for the CRB and the work plan.
Thank you, Chair Kate and council members. As was mentioned, we are looking forward to the implementation of Measure G. There should be a implementation ordinance that come before the full council sometime in May. As you know, the Measure G was passed by the voters in November of 2016, so it's been 18 months, and so currently we are unable to appoint new members until the Measure G implementation ordinance is passed, nor can we update our governing documents. And so currently we only have 15 of the 23 seats filled, and so we're looking forward to being able to appoint a full set of members of the CRB effective July 1st. So the process will include the ability to get nominations from City Council, as well as the reappointment of existing members and members that we have continued to interview during this interim time. I'll get into that in just a second. As Ms. Mosley indicated, the ordinance will change it from one-year terms to two-year terms, and so they will be staggered. And we will no longer have prospective members and alternate members, but I will talk in a moment about our alternate training program. You also, as a council, will be approving standard operating procedures. That is what is referred to in the charter amendment as rules and regulations, and so a companion document that you'll do concurrent with approving the ordinance will be to approve the standard operating procedures. Some activities and improvements that we have made over the past year. One major change is we have been able to retain outside counsel thanks to funding by the City Council. We did an RFP process, and we retained the firm of Devaney, Pate, Morris, and Cameron, and so far that process has been working well. We've already mentioned the drafting of the ordinance. We've updated our website to include a new calendar section, and as was mentioned, policy recommendations that have been approved. We've had a couple of educational tours, including the medical examiner's office in Central Jail, both of which were very interesting and enlightening. If you've never done either one of those, I would encourage you to do so. We had a retreat back in January where we developed the work plan for the upcoming year, which I'll be talking about. And then we had two policy recommendations that went to the police department in the last fiscal year, both of which were adopted by the department. And one of them was had to do when body-worn camera was required to be turned on. The existing policy at the time used the word should. We recommended it be changed to must or shall, and that was accepted. And we also made a recommendation, which was accepted, to require IA to submit to the CRB canine-related use of force cases for our review. We completed our 2016-17 annual report, and a copy of that was distributed to you back late last fall. We didn't get the chance to present it to you, but hopefully you had a chance to read it. We're very proud of it and has a lot of good information included in it. We have had a very successful and active community outreach committee, and they have made presentations to over 150 community meetings, activities, events, and so forth. We began in the past year a community engagement bus tour, which is actually something that the police department does for its new officers, and they take them to different community centers like the Muslim mosque. We go to the LGBTQ community center. We go to a youth center. Throughout the city of San Diego, we spend the day going to the different locations and getting information about the city of San Diego and its cultural diversity. We've had increased participation at our meetings. Part of that as a result of our increased social media through Nextdoor and so forth, which has driven people to our meetings. Something we've begun doing, which is really great, is we have an opportunity to address each of the police academy classes when they do their agency-specific training. And so it gives us a chance to train and educate them as to what we do, because we learned that a lot of existing police officers don't know what the CRB is and does, and so we give a chance to explain that to them up front. We also have a lot of additional training opportunities. Each of our members is required to do 48 hours of training during the course of the year, and we also upgraded the CRB monitors and computers that are located in IA where we do our review. We recently made 3 recommendations to the police department for their consideration. One of them would require that an officer write their report prior to reviewing their body-worn camera and prior to being interviewed when there is a officer-involved shooting. And then they would have the opportunity of submitting a supplemental report after they've had a chance to review the body-worn camera, in case that review refreshes their memory or they're able to see something in the video which they weren't initially aware of. We recommended that the police department adopt a de-escalation policy. Currently, the department does a good job, in my opinion, of training their new officers and existing officers on de-escalation techniques, but we would like to see it as a policy and expectation. And finally, we would like to change the categorization of complaints so that unlawful detention and unlawful search and seizure complaints are categorized as Category 1, because we see those as being more serious. As I mentioned, our recruitment and retention committee has continued to interview potential candidates over the course of the year. They've interviewed 19 people. Some of them have dropped out of the process, but we have at least 10 people who are willing and ready, have passed background checks, and can be appointed as soon as the Major G implementation ordinance is adopted. Some of our activities that we developed during our planning retreat was to continue to work with Internal Affairs on flexibility for case review. The department has been very helpful to us in terms of making Saturday mornings available for us to go in, because all of our members are volunteers. Some of them work full-time, and our review has to be done down in Internal Affairs, and so it's important that there be flexibility for working people to be able to go down and do the review. We have refined our review process and have developed a document which we will approve once we have the ability to do so, which makes several improvements in our process. The next bullet there says to explore the potential for the police department to place its policies and procedures online. We actually met with the chief this past month, and he indicated that's one of his goals too, and so that should be happening in the upcoming year. We will continue to do recruitment and retention efforts in council districts and would appreciate your assistance in doing that. And we also have developed a communication plan to help explain to the community what we do. We had our communications officer assigned to us come to our meeting last night to explain and present the plan for the upcoming year. We plan to continue the community engagement tour that I talked about, as well as other educational opportunities. We want to collaborate with the Commission on Gang Prevention and Intervention, as well as the Community Advisory Board on Police and Community Relations, and also to arrange some additional training opportunities. The police department arranged for Charmaine and myself, and I think about 4 or 5 other members of the board, to go to a training, which is the training that is done for IA staff. And it was especially helpful to us to be able to go through that training, and we would like to be able to provide that to all of our members in the upcoming year. As was mentioned, we've developed a process for auditing Category 2 complaints, and we hope to do that as soon as the implementation ordinance and standard operating procedures are adopted. We want to develop an outreach plan for youth. We have put on our website opportunities for our members to engage with the public. In addition to doing training, we also have an expectation that our members do community outreach, and we have a calendar of outreach opportunities available on our website. After the Measure G ordinance is adopted, we need to then review our documents, our bylaws, and our standing rules to make sure they're consistent with that. And then, as was mentioned, we are going to be replacing the prospective member process with a new process that will be called a training academy, where members who are interested in serving on the CRB will be appointed by the mayor, and they'll go through the same type of training that our members go through, so that as vacancies occur on the board, we will be able to to bring them forward without having to have vacancies. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our executive director, who will talk about the statistics for the fiscal year to date.
Great, thank you. So please note that the case stats that I'll be presenting covers the time period of cases reviewed by the CRB from July 1st, 2017 up until April 10th, 2018. Although the cases were reviewed by the CRB during this time period does not mean that the incident took place in the same time period. The actual annual report for fiscal year 2018 will be released later on this year. That report will provide everyone with much more information on the cases reviewed by the CRB. During this time period, the CRB received from IA, reviewed and evaluated 35 cases. These cases were either received at the CRB office or issued to the CRB after IA completed its investigations. Last year, same time period, the CRB reviewed 45 cases. This is a decrease in the number of cases reviewed by the board last year by 10 cases. So actually, we had a meeting last night, and I reported out at that meeting that the CRB has 8 active cases that they're looking at right now. That's been like the lowest number that I've seen since I've been here, and it's been 3 years now. So the board has been working diligently. The cases are actually taking longer for the board to review because of body-worn camera video. So that's something that's important to note as well. So when looking at the incident occurred in the 35 cases reviewed, a majority of the incidents occurred in the Mid-City and Southeastern Division areas. Mid-City had 8, Southeastern had 8, same as in fiscal year 2016, so that's important to note. In fiscal year 2017, the locations of incidents and cases reviewed were Central and Western Divisions. Last year, majority of the incidents occurred in Mid-City and Southeastern, like I mentioned previously. The next largest number of cases occurred in Northern, which is 5, and Western, which is 5 as well. No complaints were from the Eastern and Northeastern divisions. So before I go over this slide, it's going to be important to try to explain the CRB case review process. It's important because then you see a whole bunch of numbers up there. You see like a whole different allegation categories and percentages. So I'm going to explain the process briefly. After IA investigates and renders its findings on a complaint, the complaint is assigned to a 3-member CRB team. The entire IA investigative file related to the complaint is made available to the CRB team members. The team then prepares recommendations to the entire CRB to either agree or disagree with IA findings. At least 2 of the 3 members of the team must review the complaint file before a recommendation is made to the CRB. The team will recommend that the CRB on each complaint allegation either agree with IA findings, agree with internal affairs findings with comment, disagree with IA findings with comment, and refer to the CRB policy committee. So on the next slide, you're going to see in one of the bubbles, it's going to be AC and DC. That means agree with comment and disagree with comment. So in closed session meetings, the CRB will come to one of these conclusions. The CRB may agree with internal affairs findings, but comment that the incident could have been handled differently. The CRB may disagree with internal affairs and comment on the different conclusion, or the CRB may simply agree with internal affairs. The CRB may, however, request that an additional investigation be conducted to resolve any unanswered questions. When a complaint against an officer has been sustained, the police department imposes discipline. Internal Affairs reports the discipline to the CRB team. The CRB team reviews the disciplinary action taken against the officer and decide whether it agrees or disagrees that the reported discipline is consistent with SDPD's discipline matrix. The team also agrees or disagrees that the discipline imposed was appropriate. So there's different definitions also. And I think y'all are all familiar that sustained, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded, other findings. Excellent. So I don't have to go over that. So go back to the categorization. Okay. So this chart right here represents the different allegations made in the 35 cases reviewed by the CRB. Each case contained a total number of 88 allegations. The chart shows that IA investigated and sustained 9 allegations, which is 10% in those courtesy, procedure, and other findings categories. A majority of those findings were procedural, which is consistent with stats from previous years. Procedural allegations that result in sustained findings are not always allegations that are made from a citizen that is filing a complaint, but can be findings that IA may discover during their investigation when they are working on cases against, cases that are filed against police officers. These types of allegations can occur when an officer may not have filed the correct paperwork or when an officer did not complete their duties in the correct manner after an encounter. Without the 3 other findings of procedure, the actual percentage of allegations that originated from a complainant and sustained by IA would be 6%, and that is a nationwide number. It's always 6%. So that's the norm. Got to go back. Sorry about that. Okay. 20 of the allegations on this chart were unfounded and 1 was not sustained. We are continuing to see a lower number of not sustained findings due to the body-worn camera videos. So previously we saw a higher number of he said, she said complaints. Now that we have the body-worn camera videos, that number has decreased drastically to like 1 or 2. So that's important to note as well. So this slide shows a comparison of IA and CRB findings. So since the 35 cases contain multiple allegations of misconduct, the number of findings made is not equal to the number of cases in which IA rendered their findings. The 35 cases contain a total of 88 allegations of misconduct or procedural mishaps. The CRB agreed with IA's findings in mostly all allegations except for 3 allegations of courtesy misconduct, which was unfounded by IA. The CRB agreed with comment for IA allegations on findings on 5 allegations. So the exonerated blue column shows that internal affairs findings were 58 for exonerated, but then on the CRB side, it shows that the CRB agreed 50 times with IA's findings, and then out of those 58 allegations, there were 3 disagree with comments. 3 allegations that had disagreed with comments, and then 5 allegations that had agreed with comments. Does that make sense? Excellent. So the other allegations, the board pretty much agreed with internal affairs findings, but we have to keep in mind also that there was a lot of going back and forth. There were a lot of changes that were made to the cases also. I'll report that information out in the annual report, the comprehensive annual report, in the next few months. So that's what the comparison of IA and CRB findings shows. So the timeline for completion of cases, it's taken the board over 120 days to complete the review of the, well, I should say the team, so let me go back. It's taken the teams over 120 days to actually complete the review of cases. And also, it's taken them, I want to say the time period is more than, it's taken them less than 120 days. So they're reviewing them within a good time frame, especially considering they're looking at the body-worn camera video. The body-worn camera video can be video from multiple officers also, so as you can imagine, that can be time-consuming as well. So with that said, the team works diligently in reviewing cases and preparing those cases for deliberation by the entire board. Go to the next one. Officer-involved shooting cases reviewed. Between the time period that I'm going over, the beginning of this fiscal year up until April 10th, 2018, the officer-involved shooting cases that the team reviewed were only 4. But we have to keep in mind that these officer-involved shooting cases could have been from previous years. Go to the next one, I think it's. This slide shows the locations of the officer-involved shootings. There were a total of 4 that were reviewed by the board. 1 was in Mid-City, 1 was in Northwestern, and 2 in Southeastern. And this is the officer-involved shootings that were actually reviewed during the time period that we're talking about right now. They could have occurred in previous time periods. So what I'll do is I'll mention that and report out on that in the annual report as well. I want to also note that I want to talk about the vote, so go back to that other slide. In the officer-involved shooting cases, the board voted, deliberated on the cases and voted, and determined that all of the shootings that occurred were within SCPD policy. In 2 of the cases, the board vote was unanimous, while in the other 2 cases, the vote was not unanimous. So that's important to note also. In custody death stats. So this chart shows, like, over a number of years, that in July 1st, 2017, up until April 10th, 2018, the board reviewed 1 in-custody death case. And after the board deliberated and agreed that the actions of the officers were within policy. In this case, the vote of the board was not unanimous. So body-worn camera data is very important because the board relies heavily on body-worn camera video. So in January 2015, the CRB began tracking its cases to provide the public with body-worn camera data. Of the 35 cases reviewed by the CRB from July up until April 10th of this year, in 34 cases, the subject officers were issued body-worn cameras. Out of those 35 cases, in 32 cases, the subject officer turned on his or her body-worn camera. In 1 of the cases, the officer turned on his body-worn camera after the incident ensued, and in another case, the subject officer did not turn on his body-worn camera. In a small number of cases reviewed by the CRB, officers who were not subject officers failed to turn on his or her body-worn camera and received discipline for failing to do so. Those numbers will be reported in the annual report. The CRB has seen an increase in the number of cases that had video footage from body-worn cameras worn by the officers since the issuance of the body-worn camera. These videos are very helpful in the CRB reaching decisions on these cases. Next slide. So case demographics. So this is, demographics of the characteristics of the complainants who actually filed, well, I shouldn't say filed, but cases that the board reviewed within that time period. And we saw, can't see. Shows the demographics of 36 complainants. So 9 of the complainants were Caucasian, 19 were African American, 6 were Hispanic, 1 was Asian, and 1 was Filipino. Last fiscal year, the CRB reviewed a larger number of cases filed by Caucasians compared to this year, where the largest number of complainants were African American. Next slide. Characteristics of subject officers. Historically, officers who are subjects of complaints reflect the race, ethnic, gender makeup of the police department in which they work. In the 35 cases reviewed by the CRB, 56 officers were the subjects of these cases. Of the 56 officers that received complaints against them, 34 were Caucasian, 4 were African American, 11 were Hispanic, 2 were Latino, 4 were Asian, and 1 was Filipino. And that completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to members of the public. Just FYI, I know everyone's been patient, and I appreciate that. We'll still give 2 minutes of public comment to each speaker. We will go over the 12 o'clock end time, and I want to make sure we don't lose a quorum for this meeting as well too. So just if you can get through faster than 2 minutes, great. But we're going to try to make sure we have enough time for community member comments and questions. So we'll go to speakers now. I believe it's Marcia Gresco. I hope I got that right.
Hi,
Perfect. Then Kate Yavandevi, then Evie Kassauer.
Hi, again, my name is Marcia Gresco, and I'm going to read this in the interest of time, and so I don't actually forget anything that I think is important to say. I spent 22 years in law enforcement. I'm a retired peace officer for the state of California Department of Parole Operations. I strongly support an oversight committee to ensure public trust. In the San Diego Police Department, it is no secret that public trust could be better, particularly in over-policed communities, most notably Southeast. In order to rebuild and maintain this trust, we need an autonomous and independent commission. I learned from my experience in the mother of all peace officer organizations, California Department of Corrections and Parole is quite huge, that it is impossible to fairly and justly investigate your own. To do a comprehensive investigation that is relevant to community concerns, a body must have the autonomy to choose what to investigate, who to investigate, what evidence to have, and where to get it from. In other words, if I was going to volunteer for a board, I would want to choose the cases I investigated, not wait for IA to say, here is the case to investigate after I have redacted and sanitized the information. This is how you build community trust, from the bottom up. The mayor's office should have nothing to do with a community review board in who sits on it, who works for it, and what is investigated. I think we get stonewalled sometimes by politics. That could be no more evident in the fact that over the past 5 months, we have tried to get the board to come to a consensus as a community on what to do with the chokehold carotid restraint policy. Now, I gave a presentation, or I spoke the last time in terms of my own personal belief and the belief of my department. The California Department of Corrections does not support the use of the carotid restraint, meaning that it was classified as lethal force.
You want a concluding sentence. Ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
What I'm trying to say is that the longer we wait, the less trust that you're engendering from the public. I really honestly need to say that
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I sign and finish my talk?
What's that?
Can I finish this in the public section?
Can I give her my time?
Your name, ma'am?
Anita.
Anita? Perfect. Go, 1 more minute, ma'am. Or 2 more minutes.
Okay.
excuse me.
So back to that issue. Being as I was trained as a law enforcement officer, and we did not train in the use of the carotid restraint other than how to get out of it, my point was it comes from a standpoint of officer safety. When you're an officer and you are performing or attempting to perform this technique, you have not searched the person. You are next to a person who may have a gun or a knife. If the procedure fails or if the tactic fails, what happens is you now become a human shield and your partners may not have the ability to defend you in that practice. So all I can say is, here we are, 4 years later, we're looking at the officer of Eric Gardner now being considered for federal prosecution. 4 years, families ruined, officers' careers ruined, and many, many cities, major cities in this country, no longer support this tactic. And my own organization, California Peace Officers Association, we did not, again, use this tactic. So I'm here in support of a board that would recommend to the PD that this is something that is an anachronism and that is serving no good. And the next thing I need to say and finish with is a functional CRB is essential, but it must be autonomous. And if it is not autonomous, it is nothing more than the appearance of a political dog and pony show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate Yavandetti, I apologize, I mentioned Evie's name, you see the time. So Kate Yavandetti, you have 6 minutes, followed by Mary Lou Finley, and then Martin Eder.
Thank you. My name is Kate Yavandetti. I'm a member of Women Occupy San Diego, and all of you know me. I'm also a member of the National Lawyers Guild, and I've been an attorney and a member of the State Bar for over 40 years. We at Women Occupy, as you know, have provided a proposed charter amendment to make the CRB a truly independent commission. First, I want to say, and you heard, and I've seen this presentation, I already have the slides. Over the past number of years since we have been watching the CRB and investigating it and talking to the community and doing all the work that we've been doing, there has been a tremendous improvement in the CRB with your new executive director, with the leadership of Doug Case and other people on the CRB. We at Women Occupy have no problems with the current CRB members. We know how hard they work. We know they put 48 hours of training. We know all the time that they put in. We know how hard the staff works. We go to their meetings, we see, we hear that. We know how they consider their policy recommendations and have all their committees. We now, finally, we're getting really good, fabulous annual reports and reports to your committee. Our concern is with the process. And this is what I said at the CRB last night. They work really hard. And what do they get from that? They do not have the trust and respect of the community. As the prior speaker just told you, the community does not believe in a process once they find out that, although they say they're an independent board, they're not an independent board. That's what we want them to be, is independent, and I believe that's what the CRB also wants. When people learn that their complaint goes to internal affairs, and internal affairs, number one, decides whether or not it's going to be investigated, and then does the investigation, and then the CRB reviews the investigation, people don't file complaints. That's what we hear from the community over and over again. I believe that's one of the reasons why there have been less complaints filed over the last number of years, because people have learned more from us and others about that process. I do believe the body-worn camera is part of that, but I believe that when people understand that their complaint is going directly to the police department for their determination whether it's going to be investigated and the investigation, they're not going to make a complaint. The other thing that I want to mention just briefly is an issue of diversity on the board. As Francine reminded me, her district, District 4, has not had a representative on the board for a number of years, and I believe there's at least one other district that doesn't have a representative. There's a huge problem with the fact that it's taken a year and a half to get Measure G through, and that the board is down in the numbers of people, which means that it's down in diversity as well, and people do not feel represented on the board. There have also been people who have left the board over the since we've been watching it, and when we talk to people who have left the board, some of the people are leaving the board because they're frustrated about the process. They're frustrated about the fact that police officers sit in on the closed sessions. They're frustrated about the fact that the information they get comes from the police department. You know, this isn't everyone, but these are couple of the members that I know who have left, who are concerned about that process and feel, in a sense, not that their hands are tied necessarily, but that they're, and I don't want to say that they're intimidated, but I can tell you that when I filed a complaint, when my 15-year-old son was beat up by police officers, and 2 police officers in uniform with guns on their hips came to my house to interview me as a witness, although my husband and I weren't necessarily intimidated, it was clear to me that that was the point. It was clear to me when the first thing they said to me is, you know, you can be sued civilly and criminally for filing a false complaint. I don't know that that's still going on, but I think that witnesses and complainants could very easily be intimidated by being, quote, investigated and interviewed by police department. So I want to echo the prior speaker. What we as Women Occupy have provided to the City Council is our proposed charter amendment that would make the CRB an independent commission. It would not be under the control of the mayor. It's not supposed to be under Measure G anyway. It's supposed to be by all of you, but now it's clearly still under the mayor's office. It will have independent investigators. It will have subpoena power for civilian witnesses, but not law enforcement. And it will have independent legal counsel. We presented this to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee said, and several of you, including Councilmember Bree and Councilmember Kate, said, well, we're going to put it over to June because we want to hear from the POA and we want to hear from Chief Nislight. We, by the way, have already met with the POA. We have a meeting set up with Chief Nislight, and we really want to hear what they will say in open session on the record about our amendment, because we believe in our talks and discussions with them that we have taken their concerns into account. That's why we don't have subpoena power for law enforcement. That was the big thing the POA was concerned about. So I really want the council to applaud the work that this board is doing. They're doing tremendous work. They're putting all volunteer time, but I really want the council to consider having an independent commission that the community can trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Lou Finley, followed by Martin Eder, and then Yusef Miller.
Yeah, my name is Mary Lou Finley. I'm 73 years old. I was here when we had the election about the initial board, and I was really interested in the fact that, oh, there was just 2 proposals. No, there was a proposal for a community elected review board that would be independent, and then the mayor and the police came up with the second one, which, like she said, is collaborative. The purpose is to cooperate with the police. That's not a review board. We need and have never had an independent review board. And independent means elected by the community. It should not be under the mayor or your appointment process. That's totally bogus. And the fact that in all the years that this has been going on, there's never been a single case of a police officer having any indictment for the people killed is just incredible. The idea that that you can have an independent review board with investigative powers and subpoena power, but they can't subpoena the police, is absolutely ridiculous. What's the point if you're not going to have the officers have to come and testify? I'm sorry, but the work that they do in rubber stamping whatever the police department gives them, and they have no other choice because they have no other information than what the police department gives them, leaves it a waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin Eder, followed by Yusef Miller, then Cornelius Bowser.
Thank you. I'm here representing Activist San Diego as a member of the Racial Justice Coalition. I'm here also to identify what some of the others have said. The elephant in the room is that the Community Review Board is viewed generally in public as being toothless, as not being effective. I'm a college and university sociologist that's followed issues of police abuse for the last couple of decades, and the innumerable number of cases that raise gigantic issues of public trust have never really seen the light through the Community Review Board and others. I would point out, just in the case of Fardoon Nahad, who was an unarmed Muslim refugee who was shot within the 15 seconds in the sports arena area, 15 seconds of the squad car coming as an unarmed, the police report that was filed was totally bogus. It was determined only after a security camera surfaced several weeks later that there was a lie. The officer was allowed to make the changes. Just those kinds of situations, the case of Victor Ortega and so many others plead for an independent organization able to have subpoena power to do deep investigations into these issues, and as others have said, to not be seen as a rubber stamp when there is potential misconduct. And the CRB, as was just said, seems to be designed more as window dressing and it needs real teeth, subpoena power, and funding.
Thank you. Yusef Miller, followed by Cornelius Bowser.
Good morning. I'm Yusef Miller, and what can I say that my colleagues haven't already said, but I support the notion that the CRB needs more teeth. It needs more ability to be independent and to represent the community, vice representing only, as appeared to us, as only the law enforcement side of it. To build that trust, that gulf between our community and law enforcement, we need some kind of evidence that they're going to look out for us, that they are trying in our best interest to facilitate unity in the community. One of these things that will facilitate that is if the board recommends that the chokehold, the carotid restraint be banned from San Diego. We know it's banned in other major cities. We want to ban it here as well. This is one of those initiatives that would build the trust between community safety and a livable neighborhood. Also, just the independent investigation piece, where we can feel that when these incidents are investigated, it's done objectively. It's done from someone who cannot be pressured by law enforcement, who is not receiving a paycheck from law enforcement, someone who has no ties with local law enforcement. That way they can make an objective, reasonable result from their investigation. We have Alfred Alongo, who was shot unarmed in El Cajon. And the officer, of course, we know he's going to be found innocent. We have Jonathan Coronel. We have Sergio Wick, 17 times shot in the body. Of course, this officer, they're unarmed. These officers come back. They come back found innocent. And we anticipated this innocence. We anticipated it. And it comes true every single time, even though these brothers were unarmed. So we're looking for an independent investigation that can represent the community, something that we can feel comfortable with. And this is why people are not reporting. When they're reporting, they feel hopeless. They feel that this is going to go nowhere. So this will be a measure. This will be a display of unity between law enforcement and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Cornelius Bowser, and then our last speaker will be Darwin Fishman.
Yes, I'm part of a group that was brought up here, CAS Community Assistance Support Team, but we're part of a coalition, the Racial Justice Coalition. And I basically wanted to also address in regards to the carotid restraint, which I'm going to call a chokehold. We really want the CRB or this committee to truly recommend to San Diego law enforcement or implement a law to ban that tactical weapon they use. Tactical skills are important, but attitude, tolerance, and interpersonal skills are equally important. We want to move from justifiable homicide to avoidable homicide. When it comes to the chokehold, we can avoid homicides and other injuries by implementing two policy changes. One is outlaw the chokehold. Two, terminate or fire police officers and charge them with either murder or attempted murder, because you can bring in any person you want, you can bring in any policies you want, but until officers are charged and convicted for harming our community members, it's going to continue to happen. Blacks are 4 times more likely than a white person to be placed in a chokehold by police. I had a friend to get killed by the police through a chokehold. I myself was in a chokehold, placed in a chokehold when I was a teenager, and 2 of my friends came, and that's the only reason why I believe I was saved from being killed or injured. When we look at blacks, they are most likely to encounter the police, so therefore they have a higher risk of facing these chokeholds. In arrests for 2016, blacks were still disproportionately arrested. And when you look at arrest rates per 1,000, blacks only make up 5.5% of the county, but 106% per 1,000 people when you talk about the rest. And let me just say this, and I will be done. So what we want to happen is we want the CRB to take this serious because the chokeholds are serious. And if we truly want to bring change, we have to begin by treating our community members right. And if you look in this room, the people that are mostly affected by chokehold or by the chokeholds and by assaults and being killed by police officers are people of color, but and especially black people. But you don't see them in this room. And so we need, and I'm just we need
Finish
people
up,
that are
sir,
closest
please.
to the pain.
Thank you.
Closest to the pain that are in this room, and the only way they're going to be here is that you have to start changing policy.
Thank you. Edwin Fishman, thank you.
Darwin Fishman, I wasn't planning on speaking. I'm a member of the Community Review Board on Police Practices, but I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I wanted to just share, since one level, I have my own experience with the CRB. I've been demoted now twice, so I coming and speaking out publicly at great risk. Although since I've been demoted from alternate member back down to perspective, and then now I'm also banned from going to the police station, there's really not much more they can do. I'm also the only African-American male in the CRB, and I'm also a professor of political science, criminology, and sociology. One of the things I just want to highlight from the presentation today, and I just hope it's not the City Council, is how difficult it is the CRB, given the current structure, to be truly independent. The great weight is obviously given to the police officer testimony, and for people that don't have a background or experience in working on these issues, it is on a certain level very intimidating. It's very difficult to go against that. And if you're deciding police policy, there's police officers who are not openly going to say that I'm going against policy, I use this weapon or I use force because I made a mistake. They're always going to go with policy. It's a very high duty, high standard to be able to sort that out and to do that investigation. And setting up this commission that's being proposed by Women Occupy would allow professionals to be a part of it and set up hopefully a culture and environment where we can be comfortable asking the tough questions and doing the investigation. And the proof is in the pudding in what Charmaine Mosley presented. If you have an actual true independent counsel, you won't have basically 100% record of the CRB going along with the IA. You'll actually have significant differences, and that's really okay. All the research shows that most of the police, for police forces, it's anywhere from 1 to 5% of the police officers that generate most of the complaints. So the CRB should reflect that. They should be sustaining some charges, and in that sense, fitting with IA and a police force that's actually doing disciplinary actions. When you remove those officers, you create a better police force, and you create better community trust in your police force.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to committee member comments, Councilmember Gomez.
Yeah, thank you, and I want to thank the audience for being here. Thank you, Doug and Charmaine, for your presentation. This is the first report that I'm engaged in at this level, so I really, it was very informative, so thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with your presentation, and then I have others. In terms of the outside legal counsel that it's been acquired, you already have that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many times have you utilized outside counsel?
I believe like 5 times. Five times.
Okay. And what's their role?
If the board needs any type of legal advice, they go to the outside counsel. Doug, you can chime in.
Yeah. Sometimes it's case related, so there will be an issue that arises. We want to get a legal determination of whether or not a certain action is within the law or not. Other times it's more procedure oriented. For example, we asked them a question regarding how much information we are allowed to give complainants and how much information we are permitted to make public via our website or annual reports and so forth. And so those are the kind of procedural issues that they advise us on.
Okay. Thank you. And when this is, one of the things that I've heard from some of the members have been, as the cases are being discussed, my understanding is that PD is in the room. Is that always, or are they ever asked to not be in the room?
I'll defer to the chair.
Okay. Yeah, our procedure is at our meetings, at our closed sessions, we have the captain from IA and the lieutenants there, and sometimes the executive assistant chief. And their role, they don't participate in the discussion. Their role is to be there in case there's any questions. And so if questions arise regarding procedures or information that may be in the case file that the team doesn't have immediate access to, they could provide that information. We have the ability, if we so choose, to go into executive session and ask them to leave the room. But their purpose of being there is primarily to be there as a resource that we can ask them questions regarding either police policy or procedure or specifics about a case that may be in the case file.
Okay. Has the board ever asked PD to step out of the room?
I can recall one time since I've been chair, yes.
Just one time? Okay. That's concerning to me, just because I know like in closed sessions, we have our discussions, and when we're making decisions, sometimes the parties that are informing us are asked to step out of the room. So I don't know if there's possibility to rethink that. And I don't know if it's because it's part of the rules or what makes that happen, but just a thought.
Okay.
You made mention the policy recommendations to PD, and there were some that were sprinkled throughout the presentation. I'm just curious, out of the total amount of policies that have been recommended this past year, how many have been implemented?
So and correct me if I'm wrong, but we listed 2, and both of those were implemented.
Okay.
We've made 3 that were mentioned there that we just presented to the chief in the first week of this month.
Okay.
We've had discussions with him, so we kind of know which direction he's going, but he also is a very thoughtful person and is going to be looking at other jurisdictions and other research before he gets back to us. And as was mentioned, we have been doing quite a bit of research on the carotid restraint. We've had a presentation from an outside expert who came to one of our meetings. We had a presentation from the police department, and we expect to bring it before the full CRB next month.
Okay, thank you for that. So one of the things that caught my eye that concerning was on slide 19, the whole pie that talks about complaints. Majority of them coming from high propensity communities of color. That's a huge concern of mine, and I'm hoping that we can dig deeper into that, because that's not acceptable.
Yes, it fluctuates, and like the time period, this is when the board actually reviews those cases.
Yeah,
So we would have to go back as to when the incident actually occurred to try
okay,
to narrow it down, but the incident locations fluctuate.
okay. Is there a, so since it's an inception, since this was created, this board was created to now, is there a totality of cases, and where are they coming from? I'm just trying to figure it out, because if this fluctuates, it fluctuates, and it is what it is. But I'm just curious to see what is the total.
Yes, well, we've actually released for the last 3 fiscal years the annual report. So the annual reports are available online,
Okay,
and I've also gone back for the previous years from 2010 through 2014. So we would have to just like look at those separately.
okay,
Maybe,
look
I
at
mean,
that.
because the annual report is very comprehensive. It's like, a certain amount of pages long. One of the things that I plan to do is look at it differently to be able to compile more information that'll be helpful for the community.
Okay. I appreciate that. I just feel like if the pattern is that I mean, it is what it is, but we should correct it, that if the complaints are coming from Mid-City and Southeastern, if that is the pattern, we have an issue.
Yeah, and last
So
year,
we really need to address that,
Yeah.
if that is the case.
yes, if that's the case, because last year was different. It wasn't from those 2 divisions. It was from previous divisions.
Okay,
So,
thank you, and I'm sorry, I have a couple more. In slide 24, you talked about from the 4 shootings, 2, I'm trying to remember, I wrote it down. 2 were, the board agreed unanimously, and then 2, they didn't agree.
Yes, it wasn't unanimous.
What was the breakdown of that one?
I don't know, I don't have the stats with me,
Okay,
but I can put that in the annual report.
I would love to get that,
Okay.
because that's important. And the same for slide 25, I would like to get the breakdown of the vote. Said that it was not unanimous.
I think it was not unanimous. Because they did.
It's not unanimous.
Okay.
Okay.
We can get that for you.
Okay, thank you. And then on the following, on 26, was there corrective actions to the person to that one incident that the camera was not turned on?
Yes,
Okay. What was that?
I can't, can we say?
Yeah, but I don't think we're allowed to say it
Okay.
in public session.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, slide 27 is just, once again, if you add it up, I'm trying not to get to
It's,
it's people of color are getting,
And-
we have
yes.
a problem.
and I understand because, when I compared it to last year's,
Yes.
it was the opposite, it was flipped.
Okay,
So, it's stats, it's what we're looking at as far as the case reports are coming in, and that information is coming directly from the cases, but it's within different time periods, so,
Right,
it's
so
kind of
that's why
difficult
I-
to,
yeah, and I
draw a
would like to
conclusion
get like
from
the
it.
full picture of since it started to now, what does that look like? And if it's, that's kind of like the data that I would like to not conclude. What this is telling me is people of color there's issues in how we're engaging with people of color.
so when we draft the actual annual report, because this is just like a synopsis of it, we'll look forward to, I guess, adding more information into that annual report to address your concerns. Let's
Okay.
try to.
Sorry, I'm almost there. So there was a lot of talk in terms of independence of the board. Thoughts of that?
Chair.
I'm not sure what your question is.
There was some comments from majority of the speakers in
Right.
terms of the requests for this body to have an independence role. Just curious from two people that have a strong influence, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the board itself isn't able to weigh in on a charter amendment, so I could only speak for myself. I'm not able to speak
Correct.
for the board. But I did have the opportunity of speaking before the Rules Committee. And my personal belief is that the board ought to have independent counsel as opposed to just outside counsel. And I also believe that for officer-involved shooting cases, we ought to be able to to hire an investigator to do it as opposed to just doing a review.
Okay. And then I heard also that some board members have left the board for whatever reasons. I am curious, is there an exit interview for those board members?
No, but we do offer it.
Okay. I am very much interested in learning the why. And I don't know if that's a high percentage, or not, but I do know that this is a volunteer, position, so I get it, and there's a lot that you guys are asked to do. But I am curious because that could
Yeah.
help in how the board is
I wanna s-
operating.
Yeah, I want to say like over the last, since last year, we've had 2 or 3 members leave.
Okay,
One was for personal, well, I think 2 were for personal reasons, and one became frustrated because of the process.
okay.
But, going back, a large percentage is the person either relocated, they left the state for personal reasons, but a small percentage is because they became frustrated because of the process.
Okay. And then, just picking up on another, the testimony around the carotid restraint, and I think you guys have been discussing it.
Right.
How many times have you discussed it and it's not leading to recommendation? And just for the record, I do support in removing it and really directing our PD to not engage in that anymore.
Well, we have discussed it at the policy committee. I believe at least 3 meetings. We devoted considerable time at 2 open meetings for experts to come in from both the police department as well as an outside expert. We had one recommendation that went to the board, but it wasn't a complete recommendation, and the executive, or the cabinet actually sent it back to the policy committee so that we could address the other issues, and our goal is to have them, the policy committee, complete the recommendation and bring it before the full board in May at our open meeting.
And the policy committee did not meet this month because the policy chair was in Europe for the whole month of April.
Yeah.
So that's why there's been a delay for this month, and so it'll be, before the board at the May meeting.
Okay, there's no co-chair, there's no
No,
vice chair?
it's just it's the policy committee chair.
Oh, okay. And then two last questions. Another thing that I've been hearing from some of the members is the quorum question, just in terms of having issues with making recommendations, voting on certain recommendations because of quorum. Can
If
you
I could
speak to
address that, the issue is not a quorum. A quorum is 12 members, which is a majority of the 23 seats we have available. The issue is that we have vacant seats.
Okay.
And so so far we've been lucky. We have not had a single meeting where we didn't have a quorum. Last night we got exactly a quorum. But the issue is our bylaws require us to have at least 10 votes on either side of an issue in order to take a position.
Okay.
And so when you only have 15 members and the members are equally divided, sometimes you can't get those 10 votes. And so the issue has been the vacancies on the board, not the inability to get a quorum.
Yeah, and I think I saw a memo, a call out for nominees. So I'm thinking we're going to be nominating people, right? Please.
Yes, that's correct, Councilmember. With the implementation Measure G, we'll be moving forward on getting new appointees.
Okay, and hopefully there's, in terms of diversity, I'd like to see quite a diverse board.
We welcome any nominations you'd be willing to pass along our way.
Okay, thank you. And then just lastly, sorry, Chair, for entertaining me on this. I have heard from the changes that have been done to one of the board members, which he's here and he spoke on that. What is the, currently on policy, what is the directive that we have for removing, or what's the process in terms of members, in terms of how they're engaging? Do we have written policies or?
Yes, there is written policies. It's in the CRB's bylaws. There
Okay.
is a removal for cause. But at this time, we are trying to implement Measure G.
Okay.
So, yes, that's
And
where we are
then-
with that.
We'll do some, okay, thank you so much. Sorry for.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bree.
Well, I'll be brief, because thank you, Councilmember Gomez, for asking a lot of my questions. First of all, I appreciate all the work that you put in, especially as a volunteer. And it was good to hear that you're moving ahead on a policy regarding the carotid restraint. So thank you for that. And I appreciate your comments that you would like to have independent counsel, available all the time, and be able to hire an investigator in an officer-involved shooting. Do you think we would need a ballot measure to do that, or could the city council do that today for you?
Again, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that would require a charter amendment because the charter only provides for a review process, not an investigative process. And so in order to hire an investigator, I believe we would have to have a charter amendment.
Great. So I think it's something we can ask the city attorney in terms of what we need, but thank you, thank
Right.
you. Are there any additional powers that you think the board should have, Mr. Case?
Again, speaking personally, I think the two that I recommended of independent counsel and being able to hire an investigator for officer-involved shootings would be.
Great. And do you think there's a problem with internal affairs seeing all the complaints first?
I don't think there's necessarily a problem with them seeing the complaints first. What is an issue is, and hopefully we're getting this corrected, is that we don't see the complaint. Well, complaints can come in from two different sources. They can come in through the CRB, and obviously we see those, or they can come in through the police department. And currently, we only see the ones from the police department after IA has completed an investigation. And what we've asked of the department, and the chief has agreed to find a way of making this happen, is for us to be able to see and track all complaints regardless of how they're made once they come in. That way we would know where they are in the process, and we can, through our auditing process, also determine whether or not those complaints have been appropriately categorized.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Case, always good to see you. Thank you, Charmaine. We've had a number of these presentations in the past, so look forward to working with you all more in the future. And this is an informational item only, so there's no action necessary. That's our last item of the day. We are adjourned until our next meeting on June 13th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you.